This week, we've covered the downfall of Brandon Sanderson in the fantasy genre, as we've seen his new Wind and Truth installment of the Stormlight archive has just been a woke disaster, filled with modernisms, bad writing, all sorts of things that just make everybody cringe. There's a lot of characters in here who use the word literally a lot, which is a modernism, doesn't feel good in a fantasy setting. On top of it, there's a line in it which you can't even make up where they go, "That's racist, Kaladin." And Kaladin actually says he's a character's therapist in one of the scenes as well, adding to weird modernisms when the guy was a warrior/scholar in the books prior. Weird stuff. On top of it, it had a big virtue signal to the LGBTQ agenda, which we've gone over in other videos. But Brandon Sanderson's actually addressed some of the problems, and it seems to be due to editing changes at his little company right here, which we'll talk about in just a moment, and we'll read what Brandon Sanderson said and react to it. Please hit the like and subscribe button as we talk about all things in fantasy, my friends. Really appreciate you for being there. I'm a fantasy author myself. This is my Adventures of Varen von Monocle series. It's a 6-book series about an airship crew that fights monsters, goes on quests, and of course gets embroiled in a war which is of epic proportions as it builds up. You'll love this. I think if you enjoy Brandon Sanderson's fast pace of the earlier books, not the new ones, but maybe his YA stuff, like Steelheart, those type of books, you'll really enjoy this as well. So check it out. It's in the description below. Thank you guys so much for checking out our books and making this a huge success over and over again. It's been an amazing ride so far, and I hope to stick the landing when I finally complete this series, hopefully sometime this year. Thank you so much. Again, it's in the description below on ebook, print, and audio for your convenience. Okay, Brandon Sanderson's been under fire of fans for his Stormlight archive ever since the release of Wind and Truth. In a long-winded Reddit rant about editing, he admits the problem seemed to be because of story scope expansion and being rushed as a team. Now, this is something that you see in epic fantasy a lot. You see this story scope expansion getting really out of control, especially with perspective characters, and this very much happened in Wind and Truth. There were a lot of perspective characters which were not needed, and this is something that just comes down to editorial or an author just going a little too crazy on things, and we know where the influence of this comes from, right? It comes from Game of Thrones. It comes from George R.R. Martin. Now, the last thing you want to do when writing is copy George R.R. Martin, and unfortunately, we have an entire generation or three of writers who are copying George R.R. Martin, trying to make it even more George R.R. Martin-y than George R.R. Martin, and that's not a good recipe for success. Honestly, I hated those books from day one. I thought they were degenerate, pretty gross, and there were no good characters you cared about, no heroes worth following. Especially once you got through the Red Wedding in the third book, it was like, why? I actually dropped the series at that point and stopped reading. But I do know from what happened afterwards that it just became an even bigger convoluted mess because of story scope expansion. And that's why George R.R. Martin hasn't written it and hasn't finished it, because he knows that he's backed himself and written himself into a corner, which he cannot finish it and actually make a good ending to the series at this point. It just won't work. The test run was the TV show ending, and of course the fans hated that. And since that was hated, he had to go back to the drawing board because he's scared to actually finish it and actually have a Winds and Truth situation where it really doesn't resolve the series very well and just ends into a sprawling mess. So what Sanderson said as he talked about this, he's aware of the criticism out here. And I do want to give him some credit. He is responding to criticism and actually being pretty polite about it, which is something a lot of authors don't do. And of course, that's pretty good on that front. By all accounts, Brandon Sanderson is a nice guy, and I've met him a few times. He's been nice to me and everything like that. I do not like the change that he's done in recent years, taking the ticket to, of course, push the evil LGBTQ agenda on everybody through his works, and then, of course, using him as a Mormon bludgeon to kind of just make a social pressure sort of statement towards fantasy readers. It's no good. But I hope he gets back on track like everybody else. That's what we all want here. We want redemption through Christ. That is what the channel's about here and what we're trying to do with the culture. So what he said here, he posted this to Reddit. He said, "Rebranded needs to be edited more." And he talks about a comment in specific where this guy mentioned this with a very helpful, constructive tone. It's an idea I see popping up elsewhere. So he's seen a lot about this, right? He says, "I assure you, I'm edited more now than I ever have been." Now, the reason he's talking about this is because a lot of people talk about how authors, when they get big, kind of stop being edited, and editors stop really giving them suggestions and things like that, because they get kind of too big for their britches, and it's an ego at that point. And the author's like, do you know that I'm Stephen King? You can't change my words. And so what ends up happening is like editors get, tortured and fired and things like that a lot of the times. And you see authors' works often getting worse in later years because of this situation. Now, this definitely happened with Stephen King, 100%. And even with like J.K. Rowling, you see like the original books are very, very tight. And then the final books are like very, very sprawling and loose in comparison. It is something that happens quite a bit. So did this happen with Brandon Sanderson? It's possible. Now, just having more editorial and more people checking the line work and having a team do this doesn't mean that the editing's somehow better. People might actually, on his team, not want to actually push Brandon Sanderson hard because he is Brandon Sanderson at this point, especially with his baby Stormlight archive. Now, he says, I don't believe this is the issue some people are having. Tress and Sunlit, for example, were written not long ago. Both are quite tight as a narrative. I agree with that. I haven't read Sunlit, but I did read Tress. And actually did like that book, too. Both were edited less than Stormlight 5. Writing speed isn't the problem either. The fastest I've been required to write was during the Gathering Storm / Way of Kings era. Yeah, I remember that he was breaking his neck at that point, which is having to do the Robert Jordan stuff and was trying to put his books out at the same time. It was pretty crazy. It was inhuman, the amount that he was writing, at least in my opinion. Those books are generally, by comparison, not talked about the same way. And I do feel like those books were pretty well done and edited on those levels. So I do not have a problem with that. Now, The Gathering Storm was done by Robert Jordan's wife. It might be who's doing the editing as well, guys, not just like whether he's being edited or not. Robert Jordan's wife edited his books, and she was phenomenal by all accounts on those levels. And Brandon Sanderson is going to allude to the fact that his editorial team has changed very shortly here, which I'll get to, which might be an account with the issue. The issue is story scope expansion, is what he says. Stormlight, in particular, has a lot going on. I can see people wishing for the tighter narratives of the first two books, but there are things I can do with this kind of story I couldn't do with those. I like variety, and this is a story I want to tell here, despite being capable of doing it other ways. Every scene was one I wanted in the book, and sometimes I do like different things for different readers. I got some same complaints about the way I did Bridge 4 individual viewpoints in Oathbringer, for example. There were lots of suggestions. I cut them during editorial and early reads, and I refused not because there's no validity to those ideas, but because this was the story I legitimately wanted to tell. And this is interesting. And this might be a difference in Brandon Sanderson now and his confidence in himself versus the way that he was before, where he, if you listen to his Writing Excuses podcast and the like back in the day, he was very on top of talking about beta readers and looking at that and actually like honing things for that market there, which I assume were chosen specifically so he could be marketable. Maybe he doesn't care about that as much anymore, which, actually can make a big difference for the story if Brandon's actually rejecting the criticisms right there. Now, this is where he goes off on a big change. And he says, that said, we did lose Moshe as an editor. This is Moshe Fetter, who's been his editor for a long, long time. He retired in 2020. As far as Brandon's nice, Moshe was not nice to me or this channel. He actually just attacked me wildly, and I don't know why. I'm still waiting on my apology from Moshe, but he is retired now, and he was a line editor who, despite his politics, was clearly very good at it, as Brandon says. And he says he was an excellent at line editing in particular. I see a complaint about Winded Truth having more than average show than tell moments, which is my term for when you repeat the idea too many times, not for reinforcement, but to write your way into a concept, and you do it weekly as you're discovering it, so your subconscious has you do it again a few paragraphs and pages later to do it well. Then you forget to cut the first one. And this is something I'll have to look at. So kudos to Brandon here. He is actually listening to the criticism of the book and says he's going to look at it for the next one. This is a great way for authors to handle criticism. I try to pay attention to this too. I get, of course, lots of emails from fans about the books. And I try to do the same thing. I try to, if my fans are saying something, I definitely try to listen. It's very important to do so. This is, again, just, it's a testament to Brandon being a little better than the average author on that level, which I do appreciate despite the recent changes. Plus, I feel that we've been rushed as a team ever since The Gathering Storm. This is pretty interesting. Ahead of time, he said that he wasn't writing faster. He didn't feel like the team was not editing him enough. But now he says he is rushed as a team. So this is interesting. It's a contradiction from what he said in the first paragraph, right? If he's not having to write too fast, if the team's not having to edit too fast, then why are they now feeling rushed as a team since that point? That's a long time to be in semi-crisis mode, getting books ready for the last few months before publication. So they're in crisis mode with this, which tells me they are rushing this stuff a little too fast. We as a company largely do a good job of avoiding crunch time for everyone except for during the year. Depending on departments. The convention, for example, is going to be stressful events time, while Christmas for the shipping team. And I don't know that Peter or I could ever not stress and overlook a little of the lead up to a book turn-in. However, as part of the reason I wanted to slow things down a little, give everyone a little more time, hopefully a little less stress, so I can't completely discount these comments out of hand, and I do appreciate the conversation. Contained in the comments, Sanderson admits he lost his primary editor, right? And so he does also say there's scope expansion where he's overwriting stuff. And this is what the common complaint is, that there were so many perspective characters from Oathbringer forward that it just became a jumbled mess on that level, and he's got to be careful about that. Now, this final volume also reaches 1,344 pages, which shows that, maybe he could have backed off a little bit of some of the scope expansion in order to push this, and I think a harsher editor probably would have been useful to make the book go. But in these new editorials, he's also talked about in an interview with Esquire that he had multiple sensitivity readers in there. So it seems like the editorial, while he used to have a line editor who was very good about removing modernisms and all that, now he's got sensitivity readers who are trying to put modernisms and modern ideas in there, which is why there's those cringy lines about non-binary people and transgender people that really just take you out of the flow of the book, and the weird therapy sessions and PTSD talk that taught the use of the word literally so much, and also, of course, a character going out there and yelling racist at a character when the term racist was not actually invented until like the late 1800s, early 1900s, and of course it was used as a communist propaganda plot against America. It's all fake, and it's something that never existed prior to that. So this is all something that Brandon did, and he kind of like goes mask off here about what the problems are. His editorial team is big. It's bloated. They're not all on the same direction. They don't have a firm guiding hand like Mochi Feder. Brandon Sanderson is trying to push that story scope, and I think he is influenced by stuff like Game of Thrones and George R.R. Martin in a negative way as a writer, and he needs to dial things back to the basics to really get things back on track for his writing in the future, and probably needs to do very much with the same team. The next thing that needs to be done is get rid of sensitivity readers. You as an artist getting censored and changing your characters and things like that because these people want to put in demographic crap in it is just toxic. It ruins books every single time, and this is what happened exactly with this issue. All right, leave a comment down below with what you think about this. Hit the like and subscribe button. Brandon, if you want to hire me as an insensitivity reader to make sure that I can remove the sensitivity crap from your books to make them better for you, I'm available. You know my email. We'll talk soon. All right, thank you guys. Leave a comment down below. Love to hear from you, and please check out my books. The Adventures of Baron von Monocle. This is a 6-book series. You'll really enjoy it, and I actually don't give into the scrawling scope of things. I'm very good at making tight narratives, and I hope you'll enjoy this. It's in the description below. It is available on ebook, print, and audio, as I've said before. Thank you so much for making this an incredible success. Really appreciate you guys for being there.